So what's wrong with open innovation? What I'm going to do is actually talk about open innovation, give you an idea of exactly what it is, and then after that, help you understand what's wrong with it. This is based on my own experience with building the Reciprocity Project. So this idea of open innovation, it's really interesting, or external innovation. And the idea is to get other people, other entities outside of your company to do the innovative work. So it's where you have your internal core that is doing innovative work. This is the way that was normally imagined. But then you get other people to participate, other users to participate in your company so that they can do much of the innovative work. And essentially what it is, or how you can imagine it, is that somebody comes up with a great idea that's outside of your company, and then you bring it in and you use it. Sounds like an amazing story to leverage ideas that are outside of your company, right? But in my experience, I don't necessarily believe in it so much anymore. I am less of a proponent. I think it is an interesting idea, and I think it's set up for certain situations to work, but I think that there's a lot of problems with it. And I want to talk about some of those problems that I think are really important, that are not talked about based on my experience building the Reciprocity Project. So for those of you who don't know me, I am a professor of innovation, and I am building the Reciprocity Project to give back as much as I possibly can. And I thought of this problem that we have doing research is miserably difficult. For most of us, we'll sort of laugh at how difficult it actually is, and nobody's doing anything about it. We've got science, for example, that is, it's got all of these problems, and nobody's really standing up to do it. I was a professor of innovation, taught entrepreneurship, and I thought, hey, why don't I build this thing? So what is the problem with innovation, or what is the problem with open innovation or external innovation, whatever you want to call it? The biggest thing that you'll notice is that much of the literature, and this is why I don't think this would ever get published. I don't think my idea would be vetted in the published arena because of the simple fact. If you look at most of the literature on it and you look at the evidence of it, it's based on very large companies that have access to very large databases. People are analyzing extraordinarily large databases. And what this means, the precondition for having this, is that you need to have a large audience. You need lots of people following what you are doing as a company, and then you can actually ask that big following. In my experience of building the Reciprocity Project from ground zero, literally ground zero, my first follower on my YouTube channel was the developer that I was working with, and I had no followers at all. Is building this audience, is getting something to get people to care about. That is the key thing, is getting people to actually care, getting people to understand what you are doing. It's extraordinarily difficult. It's not easy in the sense that people imagine it to be. And there's a lot that goes on in terms of getting this audience where people are going to care and actually do things. That was my initial presumption. That's why I started the Reciprocity Project. I felt like I've been duped from the literature of reading it. That would be so easy. People would participate. It would be a lot of fun. I was had this problem, and it would be very collaborative, because we all know that doing research is very difficult, except for it's a very, very discerning and skeptical crowd, and very, very risk-averse crowd. And people do not want to participate, right? Like, academics are extraordinarily risk-averse, much more so than the general audience, because I think that they are trained to be very skeptical and see all of the problems. So if that's the case, right, they're not going to participate. They're not going to engage in this thing unless you actually have an audience, unless you have legitimacy. There's a whole other literature that exists, and more on the sociology side that simply suggests that you need to have legitimacy. And when you don't have legitimacy, good luck. That is my experience, is that it's a good luck thing. Now, the other thing that I worry about that is not often talked about, I think it's talked about a little bit more, and there's definitely more of a growing literature on it, is, governance issues and things about like intellectual property, of how do you deal with when somebody comes up with an idea? Like, do you just take it, right? Like, to me, I always feel, and I'm very conscious about that, although I do get inspired by other things in the environment and by other, entities. I am cautious always about what that actually means when there are, what does that actually mean, right? Like, how much do you actually get inspired from other entities that actually exist? Right. And so there are challenges with that. And then there's also challenges then that opens up a possibility that you might run into intellectual property issues. That's why you often see when somebody is starting up something, that they often say, oh, you need to sign an NDA and all this kind of stuff. But when you actually do it, you realize, like, why? It's going to be hard enough to talk about your thing and get people to believe in it, compared to actually just getting getting people to be secret about it. And like, nobody cares. Nobody. You have to come with that presumption that nobody cares. And that is a different story than what is being told, that there is like, oh, people are going to be really, really, excited about your thing. No, like, nobody cares. There's not a single soul that will ever care about this. Another thing that's really challenging is that it's often very, very context specific, right? As I mentioned, I'm building this for, academics who tend to be very skeptical. I think it would have been easier if I would have put something else where there was less skepticism about it, and lots of people would have been a lot more interested in it than building this platform for an audience that simply just does not care, right? And that is the critical thing, is thinking about the challenges of the particular context that you're actually are in, right? Like, some moments in some places, yes, it makes sense to do it, but there's other settings that it's not easy to identify what these actually are. And here's the trouble. You're not going to know until you actually do it, right? So the recommendations that we often have, you're not going to know, right? Like, I did not know that the audience would be so skeptical and not care. I was really enthusiastic about it. But over time, I realized that, most people just don't care, right, in the academic community. And so I have to figure out how to engage in that, and I have to deal with that. Another thing that you will notice and that you'll run into is that the ideas that are often proposed from others, they're often either you've tried them before, like very often, you tried them before and you're like, yes, I tried that. Or they are kind of irrelevant, or they're like so grand that you're like, okay, yeah, I mean, like, that's a possibility, but I cannot get there. This is going to cost me millions and millions and millions and possibly tens of millions of dollars to actually get there, right? Like, the ideas are not great often because they're not engaged. They don't have that what's called sticky information that is very difficult. That's what Eric von Hippel talks about, is sticky information. It's like the things that it's difficult to transfer some of this stuff, right? Like the idea is that you get it is really difficult, and it's often you don't do it and you don't get it until you're in it, and you have to be an expert. The last thing that I think that you'll realize is that monetizing any of these things is extraordinarily difficult. Like, figuring out how do you engage and find the right moment to monetize is extraordinarily difficult, and it's not clear to me when is the appropriate time. So all of this is to say, okay, what would I do, right? Like, given that I am highly skeptical about open innovation now, I'm highly skeptical about a lot of these innovation models. I would get you to get out there and learn. I would get you to get through many, because there's a lot more hurdles that exist than just like getting your innovation efforts right. Right? There is a ton of things. It's building an audience. It's getting people engaged. It's learning to be comfortable and speaking up in front of others and doing this. Right? It's being comfortable with failing and looking like an idiot. All of these things are extraordinarily important that are often neglected, and nobody talks about them until you actually go through it and you realize, yep, I know exactly what you're talking about, and it is extraordinarily challenging to do it. So open innovation, great idea. I wish it was more applicable to many other areas, but I just don't think it is. I think it's often very unique situations with large companies that have huge amounts of R&D that's going on. For the average company that exists with 50 employees or less, which I would say is pretty average, I would say not bother. I would say just keep doing good things in terms of helping out other people and focus on that rather than thinking about like, how can you set something up so that you can take advantage of all these wonderful ideas that exist in the environment. All right, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.